Hey there, Dr. Christianson here. Let's talk about the thyroid diet. So what are the foods that are going to make the biggest difference on helping your thyroid function better again and help you really regain your health? You know, whether it was stubborn weight or low energy or thinning hair, bad skin, mood changes, whatever it was, thyroid function is so critical to good health. And you know, the old saying, we are what we eat. And there's so much data about how food can interact with the thyroid function and its hormones that it's critical to get it right. And a lot of the things you hear are contradictory. So I want to go deep into what's important and also go through some of the big misconceptions and make sure that you're doing what's critical, but you're not wasting your time on things that are not. You know, on top of that list, I want to talk about goitrogens. So there are many foods that are known to interact with some kinds of thyroid disease, and they're categorized as goitrogens. So what they do is they change the absorption of iodine. And in parts of the world where there's no fortified iodine in salt, that's a big problem. Places that have more endemic iodine deficiency. Goitrogens can worsen the rate of goiters or swelling of the thyroid. Now, the relevance of goitrogens to the modern world and hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, the relevance is really none as far as a bad thing. If anything, these foods are good foods. They're actually helpful in terms of liver function, detoxification pathways, disease risk, and also how we metabolize our thyroid hormones. The one exception would be soy, as far as a big thing to consider as a possible food source that you'd want to really avoid or minimize. That's especially true for the unfermented, unprocessed versions of soy, like whole soybeans or soy protein isolate, texturized vegetable protein, or soy milk. So other foods like miso or tempeh or natto actually don't have the compounds that we're concerned about here with this goitrogenic discussion. But other versions of soy, better to avoid in terms of your thyroid health. Now the other goitrogens would be cruciferous vegetables as a big group. So broccoli, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. And these things are not only not harmful, they're actually good. So cooked raw doesn't make a big difference. You can't have a big effect upon your thyroid with these foods in a bad way. Now, of course, your diet would ideally be comprised of a big variety of foods. I actually have seen people do nothing but raw cruciferous vegetables. That's pretty unusual. If you were to do that, that could be a problem. I doubt that you would. So that's about the goitrogens. I also want to talk about iodine. Now, iodine, you'll learn more about that. This is such a double-edged sword. You know, such a wild thing. So your thyroid has to have iodine to function. You know, it's the main building block that it makes T3, T4, T2, that it makes these active hormones out of, and just can't make it without them. But the weird thing is that your thyroid concentrates iodine. It pulls it inside and makes a greater amount in itself than you have in your bloodstream. Because of that concentrating, there's also, on the back end of that, there's a fuse. So if you ever get too much iodine, rather than just dump out so much thyroid hormone that you would damage your heart, you blow a fuse and you stop making everything in the thyroid. You just shut it down. Because of that, our needs for iodine are very low and very narrow. So if we're extremely deficient, like less than 100 micrograms per day longer term, that can be a problem, and that can create iodine deficiency issues. Now, in the modern world, that's actually hard to do. You know, there are times where people need to be very low iodine before certain medical procedures, and it's not easy to get below 100 micrograms per day. It won't happen without very thorough, exacting planning. The other end of that is those who have thyroid disease, they are sensitized to iodine in ways that are even more significant than the rest of the population is. So the range for those who have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's is probably about 1 to 300 micrograms. So pretty narrow, it's a low sweet spot. A big factor to also consider in that is thyroid medications have iodine. So if you are on thyroid medications, you're getting iodine in them, and you're getting some in your diet. In most cases, that combination has you on the upper end of that sweet spot, and your biggest risk is going above it, not so much going below it. So the trick there is to really avoid things that have a lot of iodine in them. And there are supplements that are iodine supplements. A lot of them, ironically, are meant to be thyroid support products. And it's well-intentioned, but it's not effective, and it's actually counterproductive. The thyroid gland is slowed by extra iodine rather than boosted. So in terms of foods, what are the foods you want to think about? Well, thankfully, there's not a lot of foods that have ridiculous amounts of iodine. The main categories would be sea vegetables, also called seaweed. And within sea vegetables, some things are more significant than others. Probably the biggest one would be kelp. And kelp is not as common of a food type sea vegetable. It's been used as a condiment. Like you can find kelp granules to add to things, or it's been used as a supplement. You can find kelp supplements. Those things, they do get above those safe targets for iodine pretty easily, so better to avoid. Another one is called dulse, D-U-L-S-E. It's actually tasty stuff, but easy to get too high on iodine with it as well. So in terms of common things, that's used as a snack. Not as much, but you'll see it here and there. Then we have seaweed salads. So if you're out for sushi, that's a common side dish you can come across. That can push you above the iodine target, and that's mostly from hiziki, is the kind of sea vegetable for that. Other sea vegetables, the portions you would commonly use will not have significant amounts of iodine. So wakame is one. And if you're also at Asian restaurant, Japanese restaurant, you'll get miso soup, and they'll have a few little flakes of wakame in there. Those few little flakes, not enough to make a big difference. That's like 5, 10, 20 micrograms of iodine tops, so no big deal. The other big source would be the version that's used for wrapping sushi, nori wraps, the green little sheets. These are also called laver. Portions commonly used, not so much, 50 micrograms, so some, but not enough to really push someone over a big threshold. Now, if you were to have a whole pack of like seaweed snacks, and not just like a small pack, but like a big pack on a daily basis, that would be excessive. But to have sushi here and there, not a big thing, not really relevant. So that's iodine. Now, we also want to think about selenium. So selenium is one to where also very critical, something we really need, and there's a range for it to where it's possible to get too much, but it's more probable to get too little. It's easier to get too little. So what does your sweet spot look like for selenium? That's probably about 200 to 400 micrograms total. And some can get too much. That's more so a matter of over-supplementation. So if your supplements are more than about 200 micrograms per day total, you could go above target between that and your diet. There still are some issues about how well selenium absorbs from various sources. So I encourage people to do some good amounts in the diet and have a reasonable amount in supplementation. So think about roughly 200 micrograms from each, and you'll be in good shape that way, even if there's some poor absorption of one or the other. Now, there's a special food, Brazil nuts, which are in a class by themselves when it comes to selenium, just ridiculously good amounts. I think they're a nice little, protective step to make sure you're not falling behind, but you could overdo it. Not that it's easy to. I think they're good, but they're not the kind of thing that I've seen people just eat bags and bags of. But have one a day. You know, easy little thing to include one per day in whatever else you're doing. Drop it in your smoothie or add it into some hot cereal or just throw it in a snack mixture. And one per day, it varies the exact amount, but that one might be anywhere from about like 50 to perhaps 70 or so micrograms, a little more variation, but it's a nice little insurance that you won't go below that target. So have that in the diet. Other foods that have selenium are going to be intact whole grains, things like brown rice. We'll also see that in fish and seafood and poultry. Some legumes contain that. A little bit in other nuts and seeds. Oysters are actually really high in selenium also. They're phenomenally healthy foods. So good things to include and lots of variety in the diet. And then cover your bases with about 200 micrograms from supplementation. That's a couple of big things for micronutrients. Then I want to talk about personally reactive foods. So thyroid disease is a perfect storm of susceptible genes, immune stressors, and then environmental toxicants. So the picture is that you're genetically susceptible to get thyroid disease. There's some kind of buildup of toxicants within the thyroid, and then your immune system is amped up. And your immune system starts going after the thyroid by mistake. That's the cycle. So the personally reactive foods, they would go in the category of those immune stressors. And what happens is that there's foods that we may not digest all the way, and those undigested parts, they can enter your body and they can trigger an immune response. And the food constituents that do that are sticky, bindy proteins. So think about this like in the kitchen. So if you're going to make muffins or pancakes or waffles, you need a couple things, right? You need flour, milk, and eggs. And that's because the wheat has gluten, the milk has casein, and the eggs have albumin. Those are all binding proteins. They make it all stick together and they create the dough or the batter. On a molecular level, those proteins are hard to really dissociate and hard to pull apart into all their constituent amino acids. And the drawback about that is the chunks that are not broken down, they can trigger that immune response. So in terms of just general well-being in those with thyroid disease, there have been some great surveys done in which people have been asked about, hey, which diets have served you the best? And about 90% of those with thyroid disease have noticed subjective benefits by avoiding wheat. Another 80% have done well by avoiding dairy, and roughly 60% have had benefits by avoiding egg products. You know, we see that confirmed, proof positive from testing as well. But those are 3 categories of foods that many do better avoiding. Now, wheat, there's not much that you really lose by being off of that just long term, so avoid it, just really keep it out. Longer term, it is good to have intact whole grains, so non-wheat things like brown rice and quinoa, and also good ones like buckwheat or wild rice, nice to include. But wheat, just skip it, no real need for that. Dairy foods and eggs, good to avoid, but I think about that as a real transition. You know, I love to get it to where your digestion's healthy and you tolerate those foods better. So think of those as things to skip maybe the first 6 months or so of your journey, but in the context of real thorough health that involves repairing the intestinal tract, they're ones that people can often add back in again. So some other categories of foods to think about, there's a critical one called RS, or resistant starch. And this is the benefits of fiber like on steroids, like so much more. So resistant starch, all the things I talked about, how bad foods do bad things and reactive foods can make your body reactive, resistant starch heals all that stuff. So it's the best documented compound for repairing the intestinal lining, for reversing the leaky gut and calming the immune system. It also has great effects in terms of stabilizing blood sugar for long periods of time. So how do you find resistant starch? Well, there's a couple of food sources. I've added a ton of it to my daily reset shake as one easy option. You'll also get some from boiled refrigerated potatoes. You get some from white beans. So white beans, what's that? Well, that's like navy, northern, and cannellini beans. And also you get some from bananas and plantains, especially when they're underripe. They've still got a little bit of green on the skin. So good sources of that. And just the most powerful thing for maximizing the health and the integrity of your flora to make that strong. Another big food category to think about would be sugar. So you want to really avoid processed sugar. It's pro-inflammatory, it's an immune stressor, and it really taxes the adrenals. And when the adrenals are off, all things are worse for your thyroid. So with those things to focus on and avoiding, then it's a matter of what to include. And this is simple. You know, think about whole, unprocessed foods that have been around for 100 years or more. So build your diet around good, clean, lean proteins, organic white meat poultry, cod, Chilean sea bass, wild salmon, sardines, kipper snacks, oysters, shrimp, scallops, good things as well. Lots of beans and legumes, all types of those. I mentioned the white beans, which are especially good, but lentils and pintos and navy beans, they're all excellent foods to include. Nuts and seeds as well, almonds, macadamia, pumpkin seeds. So these categories of foods are wonderful, and then vegetables and fruits. They should be making up like half or more of your food volume by volume, by size. And of them, fresh, preferably organic, lots and lots of variety. But when you're in this stage of really recovering and healing from Hashimoto's, think about like a 95-5 rule, to where 95% of your diet comes from whole, unprocessed foods in those categories. And with that, many good things fall into place. So that's an overview on the thyroid diet. Dr. Christianson here with you. Take great care. We'll talk in really soon. Bye-bye.